to leadership exchange. In our last conversation on the last episode, what we had, we really explored what executive presence means in depth, what it's beneath the surface. What stayed with me is this: the presence is not what you project, it's what others experience of you when you stop performing and start being yourself. What determines how we show up under pressure is definitely not a skill, it is valuable, and what test values is not the theory. It is the moment a decision asks us to choose between what is comfortable and what is the truth. That's where we begin today. Before we discuss this topic really live, I'd like to bring a little definition of what exactly it means. What happens when a leadership decision is not about right or wrong, but about choosing between two things that are really both right. Because most values collisions are not good versus bad. They are right versus right. Transparency versus confidentiality. Safety versus innovation. And this is where leadership always gets tested. Values define who we are, while goals define what we are achieving. So when they collide, the discomfort is very real because something important is at stake. Either ways, the question is not who's right, but what this moment requires of us as a leader. That's where we begin today. Before we step into the conversation, I would like to share something very professional and a personal story, just not to draw the audience attention, but to really show what exactly values and decisions collision happens to any person in the lead. I'd like to go a few years back. I was working on one of the most meaningful projects of my career. Real collaboration, a shared vision, a team which is full of alignment, excitement, curiosity. We were doing so well. My co-lead and I were very different people. I'm an extrovert, she was an introvert. But we balanced each other so well, and the project was really calling in so much of a success down the line. One afternoon, we were sharing a coffee at a cafe. The conversation got a little bit more personal, and as it is, should be when we are building something together. I was being myself, very open, curious, transparent, that I started sharing something. I thought she knew that I own another company into HR, consulting, and business. Something literally changed that moment. Like I also shared that I have the capacity of grasping things very quickly. I have the capacity of generating ideas and making things work. Things started to feel very insecure that moment. I shared openly, not that something had any agenda behind it. It was just a mere conversation, I thought. What happened next, I did not see coming. Something shifted between us permanently. She began comparing herself with me, her skills, her talent, her contribution, her attributes. And then, before even I could comprehend or respond, she made an excuse and walked off. That moment forward, every time we gathered, something had changed. Psychological safety. Something I was literally writing a book on emotional intelligence and doing a lot of research that time, which always told me hold the space for the person who come and blurt something in front of you, so that they might be feel like heard, understood, and really make them comfortable whatever they want to come and share. So I was trying to see whether I need to hold a stance for myself rather than as a practice of a value. But I had to decide every single day whether I need to continue or whether I really need to quit this. Whatever I had decided with such a big hue, I stayed. I chose the team. I chose the project. I chose the culture we had built together, even when holding emotions that were very, very unsettling inside me very deeply. That was not easy, Grace, at all. That was a deliberate daily decision to lead from my values when everything inside me wanted to protect myself instead. I wish the person well even today. I generally do. I do really love her, the presence, the way she was and the way she is. I share this not as a story of what I survived, but as a story to relate to the topic of values collision actually feels like from inside because it does not arrive as a clear ethical dilemma, it arrives as a fusion, as a hurt, as a quiet question: is it still worth it? That really lingers me even today. So, as the topic opens up for our three leaders present here on Leadership Exchange, it's my honor to welcome these three leaders. First, I would like to introduce Radhika Khandelwal. Radhika is a certified executive coach, a former COO, an ex Deloitte leader with over 20 years of experience guiding C suite leaders through bold transformation. She has lived the pressure, the high stake decisions, and the weight of leading at the top. And now she helps others to do it with clarity and presence. Welcome, Radhika.
Thank you, Husna. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate
Thank
that
you,
wonderful
Radhika.
introduction.
Thank you. Next in the line is none other than Gabby. Gabby is a leadership and a team coach, an author, an entrepreneur with over 25 years of experience in executive experience across engineering and businesses. She is bold, she is direct, she is spiritual, and she is results driven. She helps high achievers lead with confidence, emotional intelligence, and real clarity. And honestly speaking, I really, really love Gabby's spiritual presence because we both make good connections together on that context. Welcome, Gabby.
Thank you so much, Husna. I'm super excited to just talk today with you guys.
Sure. Thank you, Gabby. Next in the line, not but not the least, my dear friend, Jamie O'Brien. Jamie is an executive leadership coach and founder of J. O'Brien Coaching with 18 years of experience building leadership practices that create measurable impact. Known for his listen first approach, which I personally experienced that, he helps leaders at every level move from potential to performance. I can't believe I would have shared so much with Jamie every single time I meet with him. And then he always listened first approach. I completely second that thought every single time. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you, Husna. I appreciate it, my friend. It's wonderful to join the three of you today.
Thank you. Thank you all. Three leaders, three very different organizational context here. And one question I want to put into the room for all three of you. Let's dive in, let's discuss, let's share. Let me ask you all in common. There's a difference between treating a values collision as a problem to resolve and treating it as a moment to lead from. As a leader, which is your default? And what does the other one require from you that the first one does not?
That's a really interesting question, Husna. I think for me, that has evolved based on how my career has evolved. Earlier in my career, the default mode was solving the problem, really getting into the solution. And it was less about navigating the values collision because the organizations usually rewarded the results. But as you evolve in your career, you become a senior leader, particularly at the C-suite and boardroom levels, the stakes are very different. And you really need to make that journey from the value collision to what is the precedent that your value collision is actually setting, because the decision is what sets the precedent. And it's not just your leaders watching, it's the entire organization watching. And that sets the tone for what the organization tolerates, what the organization rewards, and the delta between what the organization says its values are and what the true lived values are.
That's very
That was,
interesting. Go
yeah,
ahead,
that
Gabby.
was really good, Radhika. I appreciate that point of view. I think for me, it's a little bit different. Very early on in my career, I got challenged, and I appreciate Husna what you said. Like my values start with faith, family, valuing others, and then the company, right? Um, and so that challenged me as I was moving up the company. But I think early on, I had a moment where um, I had to choose whether and this is a silly example. I'll give you the story though. We had moved to Houston because I was in the oil industry. We had moved to Houston, and I was on the hurricane evacuation uh, list, right? So if a hurricane was coming, I needed to move to it was College Station at the time, and we had to pack up our things and we had to go. Well, my kids were really young; they were under the age of 10, and and it was their first hurricane. It was the first time we had just moved to Texas, and I was supposed to leave, and I couldn't. And that was where my value of family and doing what the company wanted me to do challenged me. And I chose to stay with my family. We got into a little room, put a mattress up against like the window, and all stayed together because the kids were scared. And by God's grace, it wasn't like a big deal. The hurricane was not a big deal. And I got in trouble for not leaving, right? Obviously, because I was supposed to be there. But the craziness is while everybody was trying to drive back and come back, I was boots on the ground in corporate, actually handling things. So at the end of the day, I was okay with my choice because I was with my family and I was still helping out the company. But because that happened so young in my career, um, it challenged me deeply to really identify what my values were. And so I think as I moved up the company, it was harder and harder and harder for me, just like what you were saying, Radhika. Like it's really hard when you have your goals versus your values. What are the company goals versus what are your values and where are they colliding? Um, and so, yeah, I always err on my family side, on my value side, and that hasn't steered me wrong. So,
Yep.
For me, just to jump in and add, this is always a difficult tension. And for me, it's always been about what's the right thing to do. We've all worked at a variety of organizations, and they always have stated values. And Radhika, you actually put your finger on this. Stated values, the ones we see printed on posters, versus what are the lived values in an organization. We've all seen a discrepancy there at times, in different contexts. And I feel like that's where a lot of this comes in, is when an organization isn't always living up to its stated values, but trying to then work with people to understand, well, what's the right thing to do? For instance, one of my organizations in my past, people, teamwork, safety, execution, and why did the other one just fall out of my head? It doesn't matter. And sometimes people and execution would be in conflict. It's we have to execute on this, but there's a negative or deleterious impact on people. And so that's just an easy example of one. And we've all seen that before. And for me, it was always trying to understand, well, what's the right thing to do for everybody involved? What's the right thing to do so the organization can execute a strategic plan or goal or initiative or whatever it is that it's working on? And it's not an easy answer, but you do, I feel like, have to be clear yourself as a leader on the key values you're going to honor and making sure that you're in alignment with others in the organization as well, because a lot of change can happen when you take that back to people and point out that, hey, maybe we're not quite living up to the values we choose to. Can we talk about this? Can we look at this again? Can we examine how we could go about this differently to try to do as best as possible? Sometimes it's not perfect, but how do we get as close as we can? So for me, it just comes back to what's the right thing to do in this situation. It's not always an easy answer, but if you can build a coalition and you can get leaders invested in that along with you, oftentimes you can find a good path through.
so Jamie, I love what you said because Husna at the beginning was talking about like a right versus a right, right? Right. A right versus a right. Like I guess values are so personal because two people couldn't be right. Like, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I was reflecting on that because when Husna opened with the right versus the right, that really struck a chord, right? Because it's yes, it is about the right, and two things can be right at the same time, right? Like business performance is important. That is right. But taking care of your people is also right. And so when you are in situations where two rights coexist, in my experience, what really becomes important is how do you traverse the delta between the two rights? And how are you evaluating those decisions? And are you stepping into the trade-offs enough to evaluate, right? Like, what is this actually costing us? Is it costing us organizational culture? Is it costing us the trust of our people? Is it costing us business performance? Is it costing us a share price, right? Like a stock price. So it really comes down to, what are the trade-offs that we are willing to make, and how far on that spectrum are we willing to go?
It's like about prioritizing again. When we talk about so many things and at stake, we prioritize. Sometimes we prioritize our values based on team, that is a human side of it. Sometimes we prioritize goal attainment because yet it's a people working here is not they just come in here to just crack a joke. They're here for some reason. They're here because it's their being. That's the way of their style. That's the way of taking care of the family because they at the end of it they're going back with something, right? So where are we comprehending, where are we adjusting, which is the priority list for us? So based on one thing at a time as a leader, which is the most alignment, which is most trusty part of it? So when these two things come in connection, then the collision becomes easy. And how is it like how we protect each part of it is very important as a leader, and that's where priorities come in. That's where so many other stakes come in. What are we ready to put at stake? That question becomes very important as much as we say what is a priority for us. That's my way of looking at things. Every leader has a different perspective. Every organization, sometimes they support, sometimes they do not support. But when the organization do not support, as a leader, what would you like to put at stake is the most healthy thing to think about. And again, I'm using the word healthy. I don't know if it's going to remain healthy or whether it's going to really cost something big than it actually looks like.
Jump in actually. So there's a framing that I once learned from a great leader that I worked with that I started using and I use to this day when working at a large public organization. Then he would always say, when we're looking at what it is that we need to do, what's the right thing to do, it would be, let's examine it through the lens of three constituencies. What's the right thing to do for the people that work here? What's the right thing to do for our customers? And what's the right thing to do for our shareholders? Which, of course, our shareholders care about results, typically the financials. Our customers care about service. Our people care about their experience in the culture, right? And so he would always say, whatever our values say, that's one thing. He'd say, but if we think about those three constituencies, how can we navigate it? Because what I would always say to him too is, and I love that framing so much because you can get the what on paper, but now what we're talking about is how are we going to go about doing whatever it is that we need to do, considering the impact on those three constituencies to make sure we're serving each of them as best we can. So as a for instance, sometimes organizations need to go through reductions in force. We've all been through those, I'm sure, before, and we've either helped to navigate them, have team members impacted, been impacted ourselves, any of those combinations. And if you look at something like that as an example, you might need to do that in order to maintain financial health of the organization. But how is that going to allow you to still serve customers the way they expect? And how do you exit those employees that are going to be impacted gracefully and kindly, right? So you can still honor your culture, even when you're doing maybe one of the most impactful things to a set of your employees. But how you go about it makes it very different than if you simply tell everybody today is your last day via email, drop off your laptop at the office, by end of day, right? We've all seen the examples in the media around things like that and worked for organizations that hopefully, haven't tended to do that. So it's always the how, not just what needs to be accomplished, but how you go about it is where there's an opportunity, I think.
Well, I'll add to that, Jamie. It's not just the how, it's also the who, like who you become because of something like that. Because there's a lot of impact that when your values get challenged, you might be the face that you need to be for the organization, for the people, but your internal turmoil, if not addressed, sort of erodes who you are and how you see yourself.
I could not agree more. I could not agree more, Gabby. And I think that is where you see people at inflection points, right? Where they're really thinking, right? Like, is this path sustainable for me? Can I, well, not even should I, can I actually continue down this path? Like, what am I giving up in order to continue down this road where there is a seemingly two rights, but one right doesn't land well with you? And so a lot of the the conflict that I've seen specifically at the senior leadership tables is, how do you actually break away from the pact? And do you have the courage to be that outlier? Can you be the one that says, hey, have we really considered everything? And here are some additional things to consider. And then you may get looked at as somebody who's slowing the decisions down. You may get looked at as somebody who doesn't fit into the culture. You can get looked at someone who doesn't have enough business savvy. There is an N number of scenarios. And you still have to figure out, can you be true to yourself in that moment? And at least voice that inner turmoil in a way that's going to resonate with the rest of the folks around the table.
And that takes a lot of courage.
Really does.
That it really, if I could share a story just as an example, and sounds a little self-serving, and that is not my intention, and just to share a story as an example, because when I found this conflict, back during COVID, when that first started in March of 2020, and everybody was exiled to the house and let's all work remotely. The organization I was working for at the time, we were not in the greatest financial shape. And so this hit was going to be hard. And so within a week or so of us being asked to work from home, my boss, the head of HR, CHRO, came to me and said, we need to lay off half your team. And at that time we were, 18 people or so. And I started asking questions. And of course, the questions were around, well, but what are the priorities? How long is this going to last? What work do we need to continue working on? What work needs to stop? Because I need, as the leader, need to think about who's going to be impacted. But of course, through our conversation, it became very clear to me that the expectation was 45 to 90 days is all this would last. It would just be a temporary layoff, and we expect to bring these people back. And knowing, as I was discussing this with my boss, he said, well, all the priorities have to continue. So, as a leader, we've heard these things before. Do everything, but with half the staff. And it's like, well, that's not going to happen. And so what I posed back to him was, could we do something else a little different instead? Instead of just laying off half my team for the next, 90 days, and then we'll reevaluate as we get there, could we do a rotating furlough program? 2 weeks on for 50% of the team, 2 weeks off, because I was looking at this saying, how am I going to choose who is going to go? Right. And so it's instead, how do we minimize the impact? And as the leader of the team, I also told my boss, I will not be exempt from this. I will also be off for 2 weeks. So the team is in great shape. They can be without me for 2 weeks at a time. And we'll simply rotate half the team on and off, every 2 weeks for the next 90 days. We'll reevaluate. We ended up doing that for 6 months. And I ended up coming to learn that I was the only person in the organization who made a counter suggestion, which was a little shocking to me. I assumed these were things other leaders were thinking of. And so that's why I say I don't share the story to say, pat myself on the back. Wasn't that a great idea? It was just what I realized is other people didn't have the courage to do that. They didn't feel like they had the permission to stand up. And so they felt like they probably had to compromise values, because I know how hard it is to deliver a message like that to your team members, that they're going to be going without pay and, working through or dealing with the unemployment process and having to rely on that to support their families and pay their bills. And that's all that was in my mind, is this is going to be painful, but it should be a shared pain across the team. And we should all help each other through this and minimize the impact as best we can, because that mattered to me. So I just shared that as an example because as the two of you were speaking, this just surfaced in my mind. I wasn't even thinking of this scenario until we just got into our topic and the conversation we're having.
Well, the cool thing about that, Jamie, is not only just courage, but creativity. Like being able to get outside of your box and figure out, hey, what else can we do here? Going back to what you guys have been talking about, like when your values get tested, like all of a sudden your mind, unless you shut down, your mind can expand and say, what else can we do? How can we make this work? How can we, do things differently? If you have that courage to be able to stand up and say, hey, what can we do? So I love the fact that creativity and courage and all that stuff comes together when our values get tested, because we can become better. We can totally become better people through those challenges. if we don't let it impact us negatively.
Yeah.
Acceptance and
Thank you.
adaptation is very important. I like to bring in some change elements into this conversation. When we anything, whether it's values, whether any kind of decision paralysis, or when we talk about alignment with our team or with the organization or with other leaders, innovation, creativity. So that part of it is very important. How we execute, how we adapt and accept within ourselves as a leader, and how we project to others. That is because, like as Jamie said, he was lucky that his boss agreed to this particular scenario, what he just shared. It could have been like a total opposite dilemma for the other. Maybe that could become an ego issue. That's where the clashes really happen because they would come. The solution definitely was impacted in a better manner. It could have taken in a negative stance. It could have really taken a different role altogether. In fact, all of the leaders could have really objected to this piece. It would have impacted not only the people in Jamie's team, it could have impacted the entire organization as such. So every step what we take, I always believe from the change perspective or a facilitator, I would say, just adapt, accept, and execute with alignment of your internal thoughts, what you are, and how you show up externally. That is very, very important. So before we really get into the next part of the question, which I would like to ask you, would like to say what I heard in our different positions is the real tension of this conversation, what everybody felt and shared. Resolving a collision gives us instant relief. Leading from it gives us something we did not had before. Clarity about what we actually value when it costs us something is so important. That's the distinction I want to carry through everything we explore today. So, going back to a different conversation and relating to something a little bit more deeper, I'd like to bring in a little bit more perspective. Think about a value collision. You actually navigated as a leader, not the clean retrospective version, the one where the choice did not feel noble in the moment. What did it cost you? And would you make the same call today? I'll start with Jamie actually, because Jamie had a different
Mm.
retrospective in the first conversation we shared. So I'll start with Jamie. I'd like to hear from him.
This is a tough one for me to think about, where it was one of these conflicts where it didn't feel noble, but I learned something from it because I made a mistake about it, possibly, is kind of what's rolling through my head thinking about that. This is a tough one to think about.
Let's roll the ball to Radhika because Radhika has a lot to offer at this point in time. So probably Jamie can offer some perspectives after hearing her.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so many occasions where that has happened, Husna. I have to like really, in some ways, like relive some of what I'll call maybe trauma, because it's only when you go through the decisions and you come out to the other side can you actually remember what happened. Yeah, it's tough to recall, but I think maybe a good example is I was asked to give some very scathing feedback on behalf of another leader to someone on my team. And the challenge I was facing was that I was not in alignment with that feedback. And at the time, I was a relatively new senior leader. And so I think my default at the time was, oh, you know what? Don't upset the apple cart, right? Like just go with the flow. This person is a really, really senior leader. And what they have to say is probably the right thing, right? Very naively. It's not something I'm very proud of, but I really learned from that experience. And I proceeded to naively provide that feedback to this individual. And she turned around and said to me, she said, Radhika, honestly, would you be giving me this feedback if there was someone different sitting in this seat? And she said, and what she was alluding to was if it was a male colleague sitting in that seat, and if it was not a person of color sitting in that seat. And it really shook me to my core because it was not that depth of perspective is something I had not even stopped to evaluate. And so in that fear of the highest paid person's opinion being the right opinion, and in towing the line around the culture, and in towing the line in speed of action to demonstrate that I was being an effective leader, I had actually missed the most important consideration, which is to step back and think and evaluate what was actually happening in that moment, what was the real truth behind the situation, and could I have handled it differently? And the answer was yes, I could have absolutely handled it differently. But let's just say I tried never to make that mistake again.
That was a very big truth and honest way of approach to this situation. Radhika, thank you for sharing that piece. Okay, let's go back to Jamie and ask what you feel about this, what Radhika shared, Jamie.
I think it's an interesting perspective, like you were saying, Radhika, to be able to watch. You knew going into that something was wrong about this. You didn't quite put your finger on it until, of course, in the middle of it, you realized this was not the way to go about this. And like you said, it taught you that lesson of I'm going to trust myself to look at this differently, to push back, to ask questions, something, right? And that is the thing that I think a lot of us do as leaders, where we acquiesce to a request from someone, especially if we're feeling under pressure, newer in a role, or a newer leader. And then we find ourselves in a situation that we don't think is the right thing to be doing. And how you find a way past that, I think, is really a courageous piece. Because I'm sure, Radhika, if you were to tell us more of that story of what was the dynamic you had with that person on your team after an honest dialogue like that, where she clearly trusted you enough also to be able to push back in the most professional way possible, I'm sure that led to a very different type of collaboration and a lot more candid, honest conversations between you both. It was probably a big turning point in your relationship, I imagine.
Yeah, actually, that was the moment I was most grateful for, Jamie, right? Because it made me realize that for her to have the courage to even broach that pushback with me meant that something had at least been done right. Right. And so that was that was probably my biggest takeaway, honestly, more than, the things that I needed to do better as a leader. It was like, how do I preserve what had been done right? Right. So that that same multiplier effect can happen. And hopefully, she was a leader herself, right? So I was a leader of leaders, and I was like, well, if I can create that for her, hopefully she is creating that, and it's a cascading effect. And I sincerely believe that culture is created one small decision at a time.
Great point.
Gabby, what are your thoughts?
Well, I just want to acknowledge, Radhika. Thank you so much for your vulnerability and your honesty, because we've all made those kinds of mistakes, right? We've all we've all stumbled and then had the hard lesson and thinking, okay, what am I never going to do again? Um, for me, one of them, believe it or not, Radhika, it was the opposite. They had asked for people to be put on a list for layoffs, and they were going to get a package. And there was someone that I had that was a poor performer, but I didn't want to put her on the list because she was a single mom and she was on a performance plan, but we thought she was gonna make it. So they go through the layoffs. Nobody from my team got laid off, and then about 6 months later, we had to fire her, and it broke my heart because I she could have left with a package. And it was one of those things that you have to be true and honest to yourself and make sure that you're doing what was right for the person, even though it doesn't look right at the time. In hindsight, when she didn't leave with a package and she left because of a performance issue, um, that was one lesson that I learned. Just like you, right? We mess up sometimes. We do things that we think we're doing right, and it comes back to us, and we learn the lesson. We don't do it again. So, thank you for sharing all that. That's what came to my mind when you were talking.
Yeah, that resonates, Gabby. And again, thank you for sharing that, right? Because the weight of that decision, the weight of that judgment or lack thereof in that moment can haunt us for years to come, right? But I also believe that if it haunts us, that means we care enough. And if we care
Absolutely.
enough means we are getting better and better as human beings first and as leaders next.
Yeah, that's values you're talking about, Radhika. That's
Yeah.
exactly an example of what statement of value states here, really. What you are internally shows up externally. And when you learn something of whether it's not about a good or a bad incident, it's about how you learn from everything and what makes you better in every context as a human and as a leader. Into the AI world, what you talk about, we need that. We need those emotions staying intact with us, embodied from top to bottom, so that that helps us to be better what we are to be. So going to the next one, what I notice across our stories is something I see in coaching consistently. The collision that cost us the most is really the one we saw coming. It is the one that arrives dressed up as an ordinary moment, a conversation, a decision, and a silence. And by the time we recognize it, we are already inside it. So, as we move to our next part of the, I would like to ask one, probably one and one more last before I really dig in too much out of you guys today. So, that one is leading from values, something leaders say constantly. But sometimes the strategic move and the values aligned, move genuinely diverge, and someone has to pay. Is that advice actually useful? Or does it let us off the hook from the harder work of choosing under tension?
So my perspective is it actually does not let us off the hook. If anything, it puts us more on the hook because we have to traverse the delta between two diverging situations, each one right in their own way. But I think I said this earlier in our conversation. It's about the micro decisions that we make as we navigate those. And the more senior a leader you are, the more under the microscope those decisions are, because you are setting a precedent for what your organization is tolerating, what you are promoting, what you are celebrating, what you are rewarding. And so when you navigate each one of those micro decisions, there's an organizational cascade. You are responsible for the impact of that organizational cascade. And if your decision is big enough, I've seen entire industries change because of a decision that a leadership team made somewhere unknown to somebody else. And so for me, it really does not let you off the hook. If anything, it puts you on the hook to navigate that in a way that is true to your values and then making that transparent in the navigation.
And I love the concept of like it's those micro decisions, right? Like it's every day, are you showing up the way you need to? It's those moments where there's that tension and you ask yourself like, what value isn't being honored within me, to be self-aware enough to know like how am I showing up? How do I want to show up? How do I want to be the example in leading through these difficulties with my team, right? How do I how do I push back in those areas where I don't know, I don't agree? And how do I do it with with tact, but still keep keep being true to yourself? So um it seems like it's every day that we make those decisions to honor our values or to traverse that, like you're saying, Radhika, traverse the differences.
It's a good point. I agree so strongly with what Gabby and Radhika have shared. It's for me, and what it is that I often ask my clients or any leader that I've worked with in the past, even prior to what it is I do now, is when they feel that tension, it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years at the end of your career from this point in time. When you look back at this moment, that moment, the little moments, the big moments, are you going to feel like you did something that you're proud of? Are you going to look back at this fondly and say, I did the right thing, I stuck to my values, or I found a way to compromise with someone? Because sometimes that's it too, but it's, I did what was right, and it's something I'm going to be proud of at some future point in time. And that thought process For me, I know it's something I've practiced, so it happens fast. But for others, I know sometimes leaders aren't asked to think that way because they're too worried about, agreeing to do something that they're being pressured to do in the moment by somebody that has more positional authority, or, whatever it might be. But if a leader can do that and stay with that conviction, like the two of you were describing, at a future point in time, they're going to look back and feel confident about what they chose, even if it was hard. They'll be proud of themselves for having done what may have been a difficult thing to do and taking some courage for them to do. But I think it's a worthy exercise, and it'll never guide you wrong.
I love that, Jamie, because I also think like it goes back to like, how do you want to leave your people as a leader, right? Like they're not going to remember the millions of dollars that you saved the company or what you did. Like that's not what people remember. What they remember is like, hey, thank you. Thank you for giving me that time off when my mom was in hospice. Thank you for caring for me. Those are the things, and those come from your values. Those don't come from the goals and the achievements. It comes from one-on-one interaction and making sure that those are aligned and you're showing up. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Of course.
I think it's a daily practice of what you are in alignment of awareness, clarity, and action. Because I strongly believe as a leader, when I started my entrepreneurship, my boys were very little at home. That they would, and since I was working from home, was operating from home, they would listen to every conversation what I would share. And they had a different perspective. They would question me after, like, Mom, you were talking to this person differently than the other person. And I would have to really sit down and explain. And that made me really, really self aware of what I was talking, what I was doing. And that created a lot of alignment from myself. And honestly, I feel practice what you preach, just don't do it. So it comes not only as a mom to your kids or to anybody, but also it applies to the same thing with your team and with you as a leader whom you interact with. And when I pray to God, when I sit in front of him, I should be honest, I should be really be able to pray with complete gratitude in my heart without feeling the fact that, oh my God, today I did this mistake, and I'm showing up to God saying that, please God forgive me, without really realizing that I did a mistake. That's value. That's again holding the space to what you are, not for yourself, not for your family, but for your team the same way. When I'm doing this facilitation to whatever I'm doing, change facilitation into ERP, I always tell the leaders, let's come together as if though we are treating this whole organization as an entity or a family together. They're all a family. And everybody has a different lens together. They might come with the good, they might come with the bad. As a family, if we don't accept the good and bad of everyone, then there'll be a lot of collision which will happen. Let's show the values so that they can show their values back to us and stay attuned to what we are as character, as projection, as a leader. Then we are projecting what we are so that they also are learning from what we are. And that's an example to set every single lens.
I
So,
love that story. That is
I do too.
hilarious because kids will call you out. Like,
yes.
wouldn't it be awesome if in the workplace we could call each other out like that? Like
I
that,
know.
like that would be crazy.
That's what was going through my head, Gabby, because I was like, children literally don't say they don't do as you say, they do as you do. I am learning that the hard way. And that challenge comes without even blinking. So I think we would live in such empowered work cultures if that was okay to do, literally without a filter in some instances. But yeah, being a mom really, really tests that for sure.
Right. Be human, be human. I think as much as we say we have this, we have that, be human first. A human as such will hold such a big place in terms of values, in terms of decisions, in terms of what you show up, what you project, and what you are setting an example for you, for your team. And that's what you bring back home. Because at home you reside to think back, to reflect back, to carry those moments to really complement, execute, and really see, hey, this is what went well, and this is what I can be done better. So it's always there's a place and a chance to be better every single time. So with that, we'll go to the last question. I don't want to bore you and bother you too much into the discussion. One last one. I would like to ask, the collision lands differently at every level of leadership. what feels manageable as a middle manager that can become institutional precedent in the C suite. Looking at the levels you have personally led at, where did you most underestimate the cost of these collisions? And what would you tell your earlier self?
I think I think it's at the C-suite that sometimes we don't understand exactly the impact of the things. We're making business decisions, and sometimes they're just numbers, right? They're numbers, they're names, they're like we don't understand. And I think at the end of the day, you yourself have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, did I do what I needed to do? Did I walk? I was the VP of manufacturing. So did I walk the plant? Did I get out there and look at the people that this is going to impact, whether it's safety, whether it's a new operation, change management, whatever it is? Do I understand what they're going to face and what's going to happen because of the decision I made? And I don't think at the C-suite we think like that too much. We should, but we don't. And I think that's where there's that big gap.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an opportunity to scale that, Gabby, at a pretty profound pace. Because I think I said this earlier as well, that I think that there's a ripple effect of those decisions for years to come, right? There is an organization and a cultural legacy that those decisions leave behind. And if we are not intentional and we don't get comfortable sitting in that discomfort of the collision, and we don't sit in that discomfort of thinking about the trade-offs, and we don't evaluate those trade-offs in the most truest way possible for us, we are going to miss the impact of those decisions. And so, I couldn't agree more. I think more teams need to collectively, we can think individually, but if the system doesn't allow for that individual decision to surface, then it almost doesn't matter, right? Like Jamie's example was profound because the system allowed him to challenge, to dissent, to provide a contrarian perspective, to experiment, to innovate. And the rest of the organization went with it. So his individual reflection created a ripple effect. But if there was groupthink and there wasn't space for that idea to even surface, if it had been squashed right at the conversation that Jamie was having with his direct leader, none of that would have been possible.
True. And I guess the lesson that was there for me also is lean into being okay with hearing the word no. Because that is the worst thing that could happen in that conversation I had with my boss, is that what's he going to say? No. We'll be no worse off than we are right this moment in time. But I think what the two of you shared is so perfectly said. The only thing I'd add is the impact difference. So think of my example that I shared as a for instance. I did that, nobody else did. But then when other leaders heard about it, they were like, oh, that was an option? Well, I didn't realize they didn't have permission because they never saw anyone above them set the tone and lead by example and do that. I was in the middle of the organization somewhere. I wasn't an executive leader. But what if they'd seen that example from an executive leader previously? It would have changed the way they looked at things too. And so that's, to your question, Husna, of the difference. The higher up you are in an organization, the more ability you have to impact things institutionally with ease. You can impact the institution anywhere, but it's easier when you're more visible and when you're someone that other people look up to, just simply by the nature of the job you hold. And so it's a responsibility for all of us. It's just varying levels of observation and efficacy with what we might do.
With all three of you, what I learned is impact. The word impact came in all three conversations what you just shared. I think that happens when you are really that resourceful in the sense like what values you bring, Where are you? What are you letting go? What are your priorities? And where are you aligned with what you want to project, what you want to show up, and what is the trust which is going to build up to that impact? So that was a beautiful conversation and examples what you brought in together, all of you today. Thank you so much. At the same time, before I really close a call on this conversation, there's so much depth we can offer. I'm really thinking whether should we bring back one more episode into this, as there was so much depth and so much layers into this conversation more. So before we go, I would like all three of you to share one piece of reflection for our audience from what we discussed today.
Well, one thing I'd like to leave the audience with is like identify your values and try to do it very early on. What are your non-negotiables to just make sure that you're able to share that with others and to live by it.
I'll say courage and consequences. Have courage, but always know every action has consequences. Make sure that those consequences are ones you're good with, that you can live with, that you're proud of. And that'll always keep you on the right track, hopefully.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's trust yourself. And if something doesn't sit right, sit with that and try to understand what it's telling you. And it may reveal something to you, and it may reveal more to you than you ever thought was possible at the surface. And then I think that when you start to do that, you just get better and better at reading the situation. And that serves you well, both as a leader as well as somebody that's part of someone else's team.
All the conversations what I have heard today, it was like a tornado coming, striking very hard from every conversations to every strike. So as we come to a close, I want to offer a big thank you and a gratitude to all three of you for coming on this leadership platform and exchanging such a beautiful conversation with so much of vulnerability. I want to offer what I'm taking from this conversation, because what Radhika, Gabby, and Jamie had given us today is genuinely useful for every leader navigating something that does not have a clean answer. But five things I need to know to be true are: values do not break under pressure, the inner work happens before the collision, steadiness under tension is a skill but not a trait. It is built in the difficult conversations and situations you chose not to avoid. Forgiveness is a value decision, not a feeling. Culture is the residue of 1,000 decisions. So, as we reflect and as we come to a close of our leadership exchange today, there's so much digging deep into that. I cannot promise, well, definitely I'd love to bring back the same leaders, having a little bit more detail into the conversation of leadership exchange. Thank you all, and stay tuned, stay connected, and always stay positive, stay impactful, and stay strategic, because that's what is going to bring values and collision in alignment. Take care, all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Husna.